I have to say nothing more to introduce my good friend, Cyrus Hazim.
Very grateful for the humble introduction. All right, guys. Welcome to Cyrus Hazim's teaching. First, I just want to say this has been a long time coming because I've been going to camp for 7 years, and all the years of my obstinance, I finally arrived and said, "Mom, okay, I'll do it. I'm kidding, I want to do this. But today I'm going to be talking about a topic that is very, very dear to my life, dear to the things I believe in and my passions, and that is why I wanted to teach about it. And you don't really get an indication by the title, and you'll find out why it's titled that at the very end. So today, my title is, my talk, my speech, whatever you want to call it, is called The Root of All Joy, as a question, because joy is a very ambiguous concept, to be completely honest, because we know it's not happiness. We know it's more fulfilling than happiness, but what is it? How do we get there? What is the strategy to find that joy? And the three main things I'll be talking about today actually are, I'll tell you, and the greatest and most significant topic I'll be teaching today inside this talk is forgiveness. And we already had spoken a lot about forgiveness today, but more specifically, I'll be teaching about forgiving thyself. Forgiving yourself for the things that your hands have done that make you so ashamed to be a human being. For the sins and for the transgressions of the iniquities you know that you have done. It was your will, it was your hands, it was your actions, that if nobody could ever know that, that is your desire. You wish nobody would find that out about you. Those things that we can't get over. We can't see ourselves as a good person in those areas. And next, after that, and with that, I'll be talking about this concept that I actually learned about after I graduated high school. I left the country for 6 months, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk. And this concept is called the Father Heart of God. And I'll just pause right there. I know that every single person at camp is not necessarily a Christian in the same ways that others are. And just importantly for my teaching, for me, the most important thing in my life is my devotion and my intimacy to my God, Yahweh. And I understand that that's not the same for everybody, but in my teaching, I will be talking about God. I will be bringing up Bible verses simply because they're filled with so much wisdom, it's unbelievable. So this concept of the Father Heart of God. And lastly, I'll be talking about mindsets. This war, this cry that happens inside of our hearts, inside of our lives between peace and poison, right? Between love and loving yourself, and between hate and hating yourself. First thing I'll be talking about, as I told you guys, is forgiveness. And I just want to define forgiveness to break it down for you guys to understand it a little bit better. 3 synonyms of forgiveness are actually defined as absolution. And absolution is to turn something into non-existence, right? To absolve something, right? So if you put something in water, you put like a chlorine tablet in a pool, it absolves into the water. That's another example of what happens with forgiveness. Another synonym is pardon. And pardon is to be redeemed and to be relieved of a punishment that we are absolutely deserving of. And the last synonym I'm going to bring up to give you a better idea of forgiveness is remission. And the way I look at remission is to be exempt from a debt that we are meant to pay, right? So you don't have money and someone pays for you to get something, and instead of you paying them back, they just pay it for you, even though you're supposed to pay them, right? And I'm going to just go right into a story that everybody is familiar with. It comes from the beginning of the Bible, right? And that is the Garden of Eden. And I'm not going to tell the entire synopsis of what happened with Adam and Eve and their fall, but I'm just going to bring up something about how Adam was designed and God's intention for our hearts in this place he calls earth. When God first created us, it was perfect. And we had a connection and design to God that is not necessarily the same as today. And when we had sin, when that moment of separation happened, we were forever disconnected. And that doesn't mean we can't know him and we can't have a relationship with him, but we were no longer in this dynamic that once existed. And a lot of the times we can find ourselves thinking that God turns his back on us, and that God abandons us, and that God betrays us, and that God punishes us, that God is just Zeus up in the clouds and he's firing off lightning bolts to hurt our lives because we did something wrong. But I have a hard truth to tell you, it's actually the opposite of that. Anytime you ever feel separated from your Creator, separated from a life of joy, and you're absorbed by this poison that I talked about, that's not God, that's you. That is the man inside of you who is not willing to sacrifice his will, and who's not willing to sacrifice this poison that fills every single human being's head. And for me, that poison showed up as not forgiving myself for the things my hands have done. And then we get more into that. When we do a certain action and a sin or something bad, right, that we just know, nobody has to tell us, we know it's wrong, a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of fear enters into our lives, right? And I started asking myself, why does this happen? Why does every time I go do something I don't want to do, am I filled with this shame that is unexplainable? Or one of my favorite adjectives to describe this, to like give you a picture, is it's poison. And I remember there was a time in my life where I was in a relationship, and I told you guys a little bit about this the other day at camp, and because of being under the influence, I had committed an action that otherwise, if you told me I was going to do that, I would not believe you. I would say, that's not me. I'm not that man. I could never do such a thing. But once I did it, and the crazy thing is, the way I found out about myself doing that is my friends told me, because I was so inebriated, I had no recollection of doing it. And once my friends told me that I had done such a thing, I was filled with a shame and with a guilt and with a fear that I had never experienced before. I had experienced darkness. There was a point in my life that I actually enjoyed darkness, and I purposely absorbed myself with darkness. But I had never experienced such a guilt that was this poison that I call the unforgiveness of thine self. Because forgiveness is a very common topic, right? It's in, every other teaching, you hear it. But it's always about forgiving other people, isn't it, right? It's always about, you gotta make sure you forgive someone who's wronged you, and you can't have bitterness. But what about forgiving ourselves? Because I know, even if every single person in this room has not struggled with what I have, which has been addiction, maybe someone's issues is gambling, or it's sex, or it's procrastination, or it's laziness, or it's gluttony. It doesn't matter what it is. Every single person has had a moment in their lives where they look in the mirror and they're disgusted with the reflection. And if you don't admit that, it doesn't matter. We've all had it. We've all had those moments, right? And something that really, truthfully helped my life with this idea of not forgiving myself was I started meditating a lot about what is my energy coming from? What is my drive coming from? And like I had just told you a couple moments ago, it was always darkness, right? It was always darkness. And that's why the beginning camp, when I drew that lamppost, I chose the verse that I did because it is so dear to my heart. And even if you're not the greatest fan of the Bible, it doesn't matter. There is wisdom in there that you can read the one verse 100 times, and every single time you can gain more wisdom. And that verse is, and I read it the other day, but I'll read it again, Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23, and that tells us, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. And I'm just stop right there. It's telling us if our body and our eyes and the things that we absorb our minds with are healthy, then our life will be filled with light. But if I was so riddled with fear and absorbed by this darkness because I could not forgive myself for hurting my girlfriend, that's not light. The lamp of my body was darkness, which it talks about in the next part of the verse. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? For me, that darkness displayed in a way that I couldn't explain to people back then, but I can explain it now. There was a night that I was inside my bathroom. I was so raged by myself, what I did, that I literally crumpled to my knees. And I wasn't crying because I was too numb to cry. And it literally felt like my shins had broken, because I could feel the hovering that used to sit on my shoulders and sit right above my spinal cord. And then that night I broke, and it seeped into my spine, into my entire body. And that sickness, that poison, it literally came just because of unforgiveness. And that's something that we don't understand, that the things we put into our mind and the energy we put out, it literally can develop physiological diseases. It can hurt us in a health aspect, which is crazy to think about. How much unforgiveness of yourself can affect you in your life. We are meant for relationships. We were designed for human connection. I want to say that again. We were designed for human connection. So when we choose to isolate because we don't feel like we are worthy enough, and we choose to be alone, we choose, instead of running away from the darkness, standing in the light, believing in the things that we know and the things we've been taught and the things that God can show us. Instead, we pull away from human connection. We neglect ourselves. We pull ourselves away from humans, and then we wonder why we hurt so much, right? We were meant for human connection. We were, and we are, and we will always be meant for love. We will always be meant to be loved and to show love, because in this grand battle of our lives, in this war between the ages, between dark and light, this poison that wants to fill every single person's soul, every single person's consciousness with this thought of, my sins are too great, I'm not worthy, I can't do this is too dark, I will be crippled to my knees, and I cannot move because of fear. And I know it doesn't matter your circumstances, if you've had an abusive family, or if your parents did drugs, or if you had a loved one who cheated on you, it doesn't matter what it looked like. Everybody here has had moments where they feel like, nobody should love me. I need to be alone. I am crippling on my knees, even if you aren't crying, and you can't move. And next, I'm going to tell you guys the second question. The second question underneath that, please write, do you feel worthy? Or you can write, if you want to write I, do I feel worthy? Could you see yourself in a mirror and say, and I mean, could you really look at yourself in the mirror, the way that you would look into the eyes of the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, that kind of look into the mirror? Could you look at yourself and honestly say, you are worthy, Cyrus Hazim? Could you honestly look at yourself and say, you know what? I am proud to be you. I am proud to be here. I am proud to be with you. Could you say that? Could you? I mean, you might think automatically yes, but you'd be surprised how difficult that is. I remember the first time in my entire life that I told myself I loved myself. I was 17. The first time in my entire life. I was standing in the bathroom, and it was the morning after a bender, and I couldn't wish more to be sober because of how agonizing the past 3 days had been. And I was looking at myself, and I could barely see because of how much I was crying. And I could barely utter out the words because it hurt inside of me. That sickness was like the sickness is below my chest, below my throat, and the I love you couldn't pass through it. But I got it out. I said I love you, and I started breaking down and weeping. Because you'd be so surprised how difficult it is to tell yourself that. If you get alone in a room to say it audibly. All right? And I call this part death to alive, right? You need to stand in your darkness, right? There is a part of the Bible that in Isaiah chapter 60, which actually, do you have the Bible app? Sorry, I don't have my phone. The beginning of this chapter I love because it reminds us how to stand in that light that we were talking about in Matthew chapter 6, right? So every single day, what if you were to wake up and you were to tell yourself something beautiful to remind you, oh wait, I can stand in the darkness. I don't need to be poisoned, right? Stand in the darkness, stand to death, death to being alive, right? And so it says in Isaiah chapter 60, arise and shine. Isn't that amazing? You ever heard your parents say, rise and shine? That comes from God himself. He says, arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. Thank you, Sophie.
Isaiah 30?
Isaiah 60, Isaiah chapter 60.
Okay.
So just think about that. Every single time that we're absorbed with believing that this sacrifice that Yeshua, Jesus, came down to earth to perform, to play out, to be the Passover lamb, every time that you hate yourself, every time that you look at yourself in the mirror and that you're disgusted and you don't want to say, I love you, you're looking at Isaiah chapter 60, which says, rise and shine, because every single morning, God fills your lungs with light. God gets rid of that poison, right? The DNA of darkness does not exist in the kingdom of heaven.
Amen.
I want to say it again. The DNA of darkness does not exist in the kingdom of heaven. So that's why we all have the ability to stand up every single morning and say, rise and shine. The Lord is here. The Lord is inside of us. He's the breath in our lungs. So that comes to my third question. So everybody on that same piece of paper, underneath, write, do you love yourself? And after that, there's more to this question. Do you love yourself? And write these three words. Unending, unconditional, and undeserving. It's funny. That last word, undeserving, actually leads me into the next point of my teaching, which is about the Father heart of God. God's heart towards us, his posture towards our spirits that are tempted to be poisoned by this darkness. Every single time that you hate yourself, that you curse yourself or poison yourself, we are telling God, we are telling ourselves that the creation does not have the ability to stand, does not have the ability to rise and shine. That even though Jesus came down to be the second Adam, the redemption of all man, the casting of all poison, we say, it's not enough. I did too much. I'm too dirty. Could you imagine? But that's what we do. But fatherhood, here's the thing about fatherhood, because we're undeserving of it, and we know this. The thing about fatherhood is to give to your child. Fatherhood is to be willing to sacrifice everything that you own just so that your sons and daughters could have a chance to have a glimpse to plant their seeds deeply rooted and have a legacy of their own. That is what it means to be a father, to be a mother, to be a parent. That you would die for your child this fast. You would never, right? If we all had children and someone was going to harm your son, someone was going to harm your daughter, and it came between your life and hers, what are you going to do? No one would bat an eye. You would say, kill me. Right? But how come we can't do that for ourselves? How come when in the face of darkness, when we are poisoned each night and each morning, and we don't like the words of Isaiah 60, how come we can't look at ourselves and say, well, if Jesus would sacrifice himself for me, how come I can't sacrifice myself for me? And that's a weird concept, but think about this. That poison is always fighting the peace. So you need to sacrifice that part of you that says, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I can't love myself. And all those questions that I asked, and realize it doesn't matter. God sacrificed for you. Jesus and Yeshua, he already did that.
Amen.
He already did that. That's why we have the ability to stand up and say, rise and shine. Hear, O Israel. That is an awoken spirit, right? Our spirits open our eyes and we're filled with the light of Matthew chapter 6. Because how great is that darkness? It's at the heels of our feet, right? Right? We believe that it is at the heels of our feet. And Romans 8:18, and this verse, by the way, Romans 8:18, what I'm about to say, this is amongst all verses in the Bible, to me in my life, this has been the greatest aid to my spirit ever. More than Isaiah 60, more than Matthew chapter 6. And that says, for the present suffering that we shall endure is not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. So this unworthiness that we feel, this lie that we tell ourselves, think about this. That pain that you feel when you're on your knees, poisoned, and you feel like darkness has consumed your life, that is what's not worthy to be compared to the next morning when you open your eyes and God says, arise and shine. That's not worthy. And every single time we walk through darkness and we walk through a trial, we walk through hardships, what's on the other end? A beautiful glory, the victory of peace that surpasses all of our understanding. And in the next verse in Romans 18, it tells us how creation waits in eager expectation for the revealing of the sons of man. Think about what happens to your body when you go through hardships, when you go through pain. It's groaning, it's moving. Because you know, your spirit, your muscles, because we've been designed by God, our physiology knows that it is destined for victory, that is destined for deliverance. So how can we have such a hard time believing that we can't be forgiven because we're so dirty, because we're not worthy, because someone hurt me so I can't be loved? There was a time that I was 15 years old, and this is really where forgiveness, this concept of forgiveness, impacted my life. I was 15 years old, and something that we do a lot in my family, and the boys from my neighborhood will know, is we sit on the front stoop of my house and we talk. Like, that's a spot that that's where it happens. And I've had countless conversations with Jav and Josh, Stephen, Daniel, Shaw, Isaiah, my dad, my mom, right on that front stoop. And there was a time that it was probably 4:30 in the afternoon, probably like sometime in August or something. I was 15 or 16, and I'm sitting on the front stoop, and I was crying out there alone. And the reason I went on the front stoop is because I didn't want my family to know that I was being absorbed by this darkness, that I was being poisoned, right? And my dad came out there to talk to me. My dad came out on the front stoop to talk to me, and we just started talking about my life in a way that we never had before. And this was a season of my life where I was smoking weed probably 4 times a day. I was blacking out probably 4 times a week, and I was doing Xanax every other week. And I was cutting myself, and I was suicidal, and I was absorbed by a darkness that I couldn't see the light of day. I felt like I was trapped in an attic. I was trapped in a basement, even if the Sahara sun was beating on my back. Even if I was in this room with all of you, everything inside me would urge me to go into the bathroom and cry and hate myself. And my dad knew none of this. Nothing. And I was sitting on the front stoop, and I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear it. And so I broke the silence, and I started breaking down crying. And I told my dad a list of these things that were happening in my life, and he had no idea. And the crazy thing is, you see my parents, and I truly will never take for granted the blessing that I have, that is my parents. But something we all need to realize about our parents is this. You know, it's really hard to grow up, right? It's really hard to be a teenager, to develop into an adult, to go through so many things that just get fired at you like this, right? It happens so fast you can't handle it. But what about being a parent? There's no instruction manual for being a parent. If you have good parents, it also doesn't mean you're a good parent, right? Because human psychology is not controlled by another human. It's you. It's your spirit. It's your man. So when your parents have a hard time parenting you, well, think about how hard it is for them to raise you. But at that conversation when I had my dad, the reason I was so scared to talk to him, right? I felt unworthy. I felt unloved. I thought that because of the things I'd done, it would mean my dad was conditional. But what did I say, right? In that question, unending. Because I was undeserving and a father's willing to sacrifice. You know what my dad's response was that day? He started crying. My dad looked at me in the eyes and he said, "I'm sorry, Cyrus." My dad, I was the one telling him that I was messing up. And that showed me a lot that day, because he was able to acknowledge that there were aspects of his fatherhood that because he was human, he didn't know what he was doing. And he was sorry that I was bearing the weight of so much, and that I was hating myself so often, that I felt like if I were to tell him that, it would disconnect me from my father. And that's going to lead me into talking about my next area of scripture. I told you guys it was a teaching. It's actually just a preaching, okay? It's a sermon. But in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, I'm not going to read it, but I'm just going to explain it. It's a very famous parable. It's called the parable of the unforgiving servant. And in the beginning of, or that portion of the chapter, you see the disciple Peter asking Yeshua about forgiveness. And he says, Lord, how often shall we forgive each other? He wanted to know, because we clearly see how detrimental unforgiveness can be. And Jesus told him, Peter, you should forgive each other 7 times 70. And that was not telling him literally, if you tallied up to 490 times in your life, then you stop forgiving each other, right? That's not what he was telling him. He was teaching him this concept of unending, unconditional, undeserving love and forgiveness, right? And in that parable, we observe a servant, right, who had a master, and the master had given him a great loan. I don't know the numbers today, but we know that it was an astronomical amount of money that he borrowed. And he was late in paying it back. And the master he didn't pardon him, but he was not angered. He forgave that very quickly. And you know what that wicked servant did? And it's called the unforgiving servant, right? He had someone of his own beneath him, and that man, the wage that he did not pay back was a morsel in comparison. Isn't that a lot like ourselves? Jesus, Yeshua, could forgive the entirety of darkness that consumes the entire earth. But if we do something wrong, we're not going to figure ourselves. Who are we to say that we shouldn't be forgiven? And in this parable, that portion ends with the servant throwing his servant in jail, right? And you know what his master did to him when he found out this? He threw him in jail. And he lost everything he had. Doesn't that remind you, doesn't it seem a little bit like the poison existed in his life? How many times has that moment of unforgiveness, that moment of self-hate, actually bled into something so much greater? And when you're there, you're like, holy, how am I here? Why do I hate why am I cutting my wrist open right now? How did I get from, I cheat on my girlfriend to, last night, by the way, I didn't kill myself. How does that happen? It's because we allow that poison to flood our mindsets, right? And that's going to lead me into my next question, right? And the question 4 is, who here has hated themselves? So I guess the question have you hated yourself? Have you hated yourself before? And that, I'm not going to say yes, everybody has done that before, but answer yourself honestly. Have you hated yourself before? Right? And I'm actually giving you the next question as well. So, have I hated myself before? And then question 5 is, who here has cried tears of joy? Right after that question is, who here has cried tears of joy? Right? And there's this thing that I call the strategy, right? And this is what I believe to be the root of a lot of joy, just for the sake of the teaching I entitled The Root of All Joy, right? For me, this strategy is, how do you get to the place where you can tell yourself, I love you today? How can you get to the place where you can tell yourself in the mirror, I love you today, as easily as you can tell someone that you like their $400 shoes? How? Can you imagine saying to yourself, I love you that easily? It'd be pretty amazing, don't you think? It would get rid of all the poison. And so, now I want you guys, if you're folded, have it both next to each other. So you can see that portion where it says, draw who you want to be, right? Or draw who you were. And then the other one says, write who you want to be. And so now you see those questions 1 through 5, right? And this is something that I want, it's going to take a little bit, that this exercise that we're about to do, guys, do not think about it as an artistic exercise, because I already know everybody in the room can't draw well. It's not about that. It's not like, don't look at someone next to you and say, wow, he has a really detailed drawing. No. Because this is what my drawing was for this exercise, right? Draw who you were. And this is a drawing of a man with his stomach out of his body and a very dark entity causing that. And then the questions, you see just an example. So for you guys, look at all those questions. Read them to yourself. Think about your responses. Think about all the things in your life, those memories that are the responses, because those responses come from circumstances, and let that generate that drawing. It could be a doodle, it could be a stick figure, it could be as detailed as you want it to be, all right? So we'll take like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, so everyone just stay silent, read those questions over and over, and let it generate the first natural image that comes to your mind. And you know what? If the who you were wasn't as dark as something like this, that's okay. I'm not proclaiming or professing every person here has seen as much darkness as I have. This is simply an illustration for yourself that you're going to realize, oh, that's poison. Oh, that's scary. That's how I see myself. That is what I believe every time I don't believe in Isaiah chapter 60. And on the other side, when you guys finish your drawing, I'm going to move us into writing. So everyone just take that moment, answer those questions, think to yourself. This poem is titled, I Am Falling. And this poem is actually about the literal circumstance that I told you guys about when I was on my knees in my bathroom. And so, mind you, this poem is not to glorify the darkness that had existed, right? This is not a poem to show that this level of thinking, this poisoned psyche is a good thing to be displayed in life. The point of this poem is, well, you'll see, because I'll read another poem after we finish the second page, and you'll see the difference, all right? And by the way, when anyone reads a poem or prose or anything, you do not clap, you snap. If you clap, it's like, I'm going to hit you, so don't. I'm falling. Vernacular. Spider bites. Stung by a scorpion. Fractured wrist with a broken hand. Feel it, this poison, this darkness. Isaac, the poet, is crying. Terrified, 7 years old, huddled to your knees, keeping warm. He hadn't known such darkness could be. As the venom coursed into his feet, it plagued his very soul as his genius. Pretender, not alone. This is not part one, not a relapse. I stand here. The shower running, raining hot water, my mirror looking less clear. It's in my worry. Give me love, drag me, scrape me, and dangle me from my feet. I keep a pen next to me and a knife beside me when I sleep. I took a chance with you, looking into the mirror. What did I do? What do I do? I am tired of hate. I just want love. How hard is this? Could you do that? Ever love me? Ever just be okay with it? How I am? This is it. We need to love, not hate. Your words empty shells, a skeletal system missing its flesh. I wipe the mirror clear, a reflection staring at me, 7 years old, looking 17. Something broken inside of me. Now this poison is killing me. I can't keep them here. My eyes fall, my tears hot. Boiling oils leaving lines. 3rd-degree burns tracing the outlines of my cheekbones. It all fell out. I once played with Legos. Now this pain sits here consuming me. Question me? He fell. His knees bled. This is all. My body hurts. My body falls. What do I do? What have I done this time? Hate. It's a part of me. Do I self-medicate? I want to drink. I would love to die. This poison sits at my feet. This darkness laying before me has grown colder around my knees. This weather has courted me. This is it. I took the chance. How I lie here trembling. It's this pain that fuels me. That's my world. Hate. Never stop. Poison birth around my knees, and I turn from this mirror of fear, a prey of needs. What do I do? Can you help? Start loving me. Stop hating me. I'm falling to my knees. I'm going to give in. This poison is ravenous. It's 100 voices inside my head. Choosing sides, I'm switching sides. 7 years old, and I'm afraid. 17 years old, and this addiction won't go away. Can you hear my voice trembling? I'm falling down. Superpowers, they're dark powers. It's the scorpion sting burning. I'm playing with Legos, or I'm toying with vices. Thoughts of suicide. Either way, it all feels enticing. And the reason I read that poem for you guys today, and it was very long. The reason I read that poem for you today, and its title, I Am Falling, is it wasn't about me falling on my knees in the bathroom. That was the most visceral display of how poisoned I used to be with unforgiveness. And I don't know about all of you. I don't know everyone's personal life, and I don't know the way people view art or view that kind of art or that kind of writing. But as you guys can clearly see, art is very important to me in my life. And there was a time I read that in high school. I was actually, Juliana's mom was my teacher. I was in a poetry class in high school, and I used to think it was funny back then. But I read a poem similar to this, and a girl started bawling her eyes out. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I feel like killing myself." Like, that is the worst poem I've ever heard. But not talent, but because of the sickness that she could hear. And I'm not telling you this story or reading this poem so you can pity my circumstances, because I'm a very joyful person now. I don't experience this poison. But it's simply to show you how dangerous it is to despise the creation that is in you. Because every single person here is beautiful, right? Daniel plays hockey and Javin wants to do real estate. And Josh has a funky groove and he loves awesome music and he likes to dance. But you know what? It doesn't matter that they're different. They all have poison, but they all also have victory. They all have this joy, this light that it tells us about in Matthew and in Isaiah chapter 60. And so for this next page, guys, the page next to it, this will be the next exercise, okay? This is a writing exercise. And it's not going to be a poem that sounds like that, obviously. That's very long. It took a long time to write. I've been writing my whole life. But it doesn't matter if you're talented at writing, guys. Because something that is real powerful about writing down is to write with a pencil is like crying with your tears, right? If you're someone who doesn't cry that often and then you cry, you know. When you're done, you go, why? Because that poison is leaving you. So write down, right? And this is not going to be like that drawing exercise. That drawing exercise was about drawing the poison, right? This is going to be about writing the light that is within you, writing about the joy and the peace and the victory of that battle that is ahead of you, or if you're in it right now, even be more beautiful. And so for me, I just wrote down this short blurb, and this is how it goes. Very rare forever. Innocently delivered, I have a gentle pedal, a humble warrior. There will never be a surrender. No, never surrender again. There will never be surrender. Never surrender again. And for me, what that really means is this poison, this life of darkness that I lived in, and there was a point that I actually enjoyed it, I would never live that way again. Once I've arrived at this place where I've come to terms and I've come to peace with the truth of Romans 8:18 and Matthew 6 and Isaiah chapter 60, I love myself. And I do, and I can say that to myself now. I can look in the mirror, my strategy, and I literally have this. I have these crayons that you can write on like glass with, and it stays with you. You can't erase it. And I wrote on my mirror, I love you today. I love you today because even though I'm in this place now, and it was after a lot of hardships and a lot of trials, it's still hard for me to love myself. I still have moments of weakness where I slip back on that poison and I'm consumed by thoughts of darkness and consumed by the actions that my hands have made. But it's okay because it tells us in Isaiah 60, rise and shine. And so that's going to lead me into my last testimony, my last story, and then I'll read this poem. For me, the most current, the most relevant moment of this forgiveness that I'm telling you guys about was actually when I was out of the country. So a little bit about me. I'm 19 now, but when I graduated high school, actually not, I graduated early, but when I turned 18, a week after I turned 18, I left the country for 6 months. And I was in London for 3 months. And after London, we went on a missions to South Africa and Spain. And when I was in South Africa, I had no idea at all, that we would be doing ministry in a rehabilitation center called Caroline Rehabilitation Center. And Caroline was in this region of South Africa on the eastern north coast, facing Madagascar. And it was in this beautiful area called Kloof. And it was a rehab center on the top of a mountain. And I was in South Africa for 5 weeks. And we would go to this rehabilitation center twice a week for 5 weeks with the same people. And we would show up before breakfast. And we would leave at midnight. So when we went, we were there. We were in the rehab. And it's actually funny, because when I first got there, I did not know that I was going to be doing ministry in a rehab. And I've never personally been put into rehab. But I have actually gone through a season of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if some of you don't know what that is, it's actually Jason, one of our speakers yesterday, the man who told us about his life story. He was actually my sponsor in AA. And it is a center where you meet consistently so you can learn techniques to overcome your addiction. And there's some things about AA that are a little different than my beliefs, but besides all that, I was in that for a season. When I was 17, I was in that for a season. And when I got to South Africa, I was not ready. And when I say not ready, I did not know that our ministry was going to be like, oh, I walk in and they're saying having 12 step classes. And all of a sudden my memory goes, right? And unforgiveness, right? Poison immediately. So we get out of like the debrief meeting first time we get there, and all the students, like all my roommates, they're like ahead of me, and my leader's behind me. I didn't know she's behind me. And I'm like purposely walking slower than them because I start bawling, but I'm silent. And I start walking slower, so everybody is not with me. And she walks in, she said, Cyrus, I know this is hard for you, but if at some point you could share your testimony to the people in this rehab, it would bless you more than it could bless them. And the 5th last time we went, I shared my testimony. And the end of my story, the way I got here today, the way I have an intimacy with God in the ways that I do, was as I stood there, I remember I was underneath the tree at the bottom of the hill, and they were all on chairs at the above of the hill, and the jungle was behind me. It was in the middle of the daytime, and I get finished telling this testimony, and you know how it ended? Right there telling the story. That's how my story ended. Right there, inside of this joy, inside the victory of peace that I desired so badly in my life. And boy, I was not expecting it to be in South Africa, doing ministry at a rehab center, telling people how I became Christian. And that's the beautiful thing about our lives, that when we give our will over to God, and He shows us the design, He shows us the way it can go, it turns into that lampstand, right? It looks like the lamp of Narnia. It's a guiding force that all you have to do is that rise and shine. What does that require of us? To stand there in the glory, to stand there in the joy. And with that, I'm going to read this. I'm going to go a little bit over time. I'm sorry, but my time is also pushed back. So I'm going to read this poem. And this poem is like the full version of the other side of this exercise. And you guys, I want you to write that on your own time because we don't have time right here. But please, and even though I'm sure half of you probably don't like writing, maybe more of you because it's the worst subject in school. I promise you, writing is one of the most beautiful things that exists in all of mankind. But, I'm going to read you this because this is my extended version, and you'll see the differences between I Am Falling, and this is called Ivory Pastel Green number 9. White Nike socks stained by pencil marks, long baggy sleeves stained with coffee and blood drops. I rolled up one sleeve just as I began to cry, Just as I began to write, a teardrop fell, a teardrop stained my cheek. What were these tears? Why have I been crying? What do I write? Where am I going? It was peace, with all of her needles sewing happiness beautifully, sewing cresses to the inside of my tears, and for the first time I cried from the absence of anxiety. Not anger or endless time expansions of terrifying depression, not hiding or rapidly fluctuating obsessions. No, they were teardrops filled with the masterpieces of Salvador Dali and Brunelleschi. They were drops, and they have made me. They have molded my lips and my jaw. They have sculpted my eye and my Cupid's bow from dirty old clay, once found in a forgotten jar, hidden deep beneath the catacombs of an ancient monastery. My brows admitting to every trembling that I feel, and the countless night times that I have escaped the cravings that have hurt me. Every night I have lied awake, choking, crying violently. I try to hide the shame. There they were again. Now can't you see way past the thickness of this foresting wilderness and the lovely exchange of a meadow, leaves rolling in the air, a beautiful field colored in ivory pastel green, murmuring virtuous verses, running through the lavender field, running, sprinting past my veil, past my combs, through my nails, disposing of a generation of fears laid at the feet of these mountains. And it was under this tree, fencing precious fields, I knew I was happy. It was in this field I cried holy tears, precious salts and joy, ivory pastel greens, and blue trees. It was a lavender love, a blue yellow sun. It was me. It was myself I've tortured. Now I finally love. And as we talked about the Father heart of God, and knowing that Yahweh is that sunlight each morning, as we talked about this poison peace that we battle each day, and understanding the victory that we can stand against our darkness, as we understand how crucial it is to forgive ourselves, read those questions, look at your drawing, finish that poem, and I promise you, this strategy, it is the root of all joy. Thank you.
Woo! Woo!